So here's how this is gonna work. This video will cover every movie I saw this year leading up to the top 20, and then I'll do the top 20 video later, and then maybe down the line I'll do a tribute video, maybe even talk about the television shows I saw this year, who knows? But anyway, let's get down to business. Starting at number 80 is The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which is one of the most offensive, incompetent, and pathetic pieces of garbage I have ever seen. There is really no way to truly express how tasteless this movie is.
No, God, Ruben, I've been so scared. I've had the most terrible nightmares.
On top of being poorly acted and horribly written and directed, it adds insult to injury by exploiting the suffering of real people without having anything to say or any justifiable reason to exist. The silence, hilariously bad. It's basically a combination of all the worst elements of like A Quiet Place and Bird Box. Elvis the Alien did a review that pretty much summed up my thoughts, so I recommend you go check that out. The Curse of La Llorona, it was a failure in every single way. I was not scared at all. I was bored out of my mind. I was annoyed by the characters and the choices they made. And my god, those god-awful jump scares happen every 5 minutes. And then there's Ma, another incredibly boring and unscary horror movie.
If you don't want to be cool, that's on you. Just saying.
The remake of Aladdin, from start to end, I absolutely hated this movie. The acting from everyone is either bland or just awful. The song numbers are so lazily done. There are moments that are just pandering, and despite having a budget of over $180 million, it's one of the cheapest looking movies I've ever seen. So much so that it looks like a bad High School Musical. And not that kind of High School Musical. Hellboy, it was embarrassing how bad it was. They could have just done Hellboy 3 with Guillermo del Toro, but no. They instead had to go with this horribly edited, badly written, hilariously dated nightmare with no charm and no personality. Serenity, this movie is so far up its own ass that it just comes off like a parody of itself. The Lion King remake, I've been very lenient on this movie in the past, but now I have a more concrete opinion on it. The visual effects for the environment and the animals are without a doubt good, but it completely robs the movie of any emotion or drama. And besides that, it's just filled to the brim with bad acting and embarrassing scenes.
Long live the king!
Speaking of embarrassing, I'll be sure to talk about this in a few months. Velvet Buzzsaw, I talked about this already in my Netflix video. Six Underground, it's a Michael Bay movie with all his worst traits. I'll be sure to talk about this in my next Netflix video. Dark Phoenix, what a great final chapter for the X-Men franchise. Just complete amateur nonsense. Murder mystery, I mean, come on, what do you expect? The Professor, it's a movie starring Johnny Depp as a college professor who gets cancer. And right from there, it goes in every direction you expect it to go. He's gonna act like he has 9 months to live or whatever. There's gonna be funny moments. He's gonna get sicker, family stuff. And we're gonna try to have a message about life and death, but it's gonna be completely shallow and disingenuous. It's just so bad. Unicorn Store, I talked about this in my Netflix video. Brightburn, it was an interesting concept, plus the acting was pretty decent, and there were some really good moments of gore. But the movie really didn't know what to do for the story beyond that simple concept, and it robbed the movie of any impact or memorability. Hobbs and Shaw, even for a Fast and Furious movie, this was really stupid. But the thing is, I don't mind dumb writing as long as the action's good, and the action in this movie is pretty boring. Wine Country, it was a watered down version of Sideways. Occasionally there were funny moments and I liked the chemistry of the actors, but Beyond that, there's nothing that really makes this worth watching. I mean, just go watch Sideways. Pet Sematary, there were some effective moments of horror, and overall it was well made and well acted, but it just ends up being another forgettable horror film. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, same thing. The Dirt, I've talked about this in my Netflix video. Godzilla King of the Monsters was very disappointing. The visual effects were great and there were some cool action sequences and shots, but the story is pretty bad, the characters suck, and it gets to a point where it's just too much and I want it to end. It Chapter 2, again, it was well made and there were some effective moments, and I like the cast a lot, especially Bill Hader, who pretty much had to carry this entire thing. But the pacing is terrible, the plot is incredibly convoluted, the scares are weak, and the concept just isn't scary anymore without the main characters being kids. That's what made the last one work as well as it did. But I don't know, at least it was so bad at times that it was funny. The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. This movie has a bit of a history behind it. It was made by a man named Terry Gilliam, who made many great movies in the past like Brazil and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He tried to get this movie made for over 30 years, trying and failing over and over again to get it off the ground with different actors and productions. Now it's finally here, and it's basically a weaker version of The Fisher King. I remember Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce being good and the cinematography being decent, but I don't remember any jokes, I don't remember any conflicts, I don't even remember the sequence of events. It really is a shame that this man spent decades of his life trying to get this made, and it came out as this lifeless, joyless movie. Cold Pursuit, I don't remember anything about this. Yesterday, it was an interesting concept. The acting was really good, especially from the main guy, and there were moments where Danny Boyle's directing skills shined, but the script is just cliche and boring, and the rules of the concept got so annoying. I get why people like it, I just thought it was super lame. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. The effects, acting, cinematography, and music are all top-notch like always, no argument there, but the writing is just bad. The pacing of the first half is terrible, there are plot developments that are literally taken right out of fan theory videos, and at the end you realize I didn't really care for these new characters as much as they wanted me to. It's a shame it ended like this, but it's not horrible. Glass, I talked about this already. Overall, it's the guilty pleasure movie of the year, just like Venom was last year. Judy, I found it to be very dull. Renee Zellweger was good though. The Art of Self-Defense, there's some stuff of value in this movie. Jesse Eisenberg did a great job, and the twisted sense of humor kind of worked, but there's absolutely no subtlety to the themes of this movie. There are moments where it's technically inconsistent, and it comes off as an attempt to be an edgy Wes Anderson movie. High Life, it's an artistic space movie, kind of good, but whatever. Captain Marvel, it was the safest movie I've seen all year. It took no risks, and there's not a lot of memorable moments. That being said, it was well made, and it is watchable for the most part. I don't know, if you're like a Marvel fan, you might like it. Extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. It was fine. Triple Frontier, same thing. I thought it was fine. If you're like a dad, you might like it. Long Shot. I like the message of the movie. There were some funny bits in it, and Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen were both good. And for the little amount of time he was in this, I really enjoyed Andy Serkis's work. But a lot of the jokes were Seth Rogen's typical like gross out humor, and it just made the movie kind of boring for me. High Flying Bird. There are some really well written, well acted, and well directed scenes, but after 2 viewings, I'm still not exactly sure what the plot of this movie is. If you're a basketball fan, you may be able to understand what's happening, but Alita Battle Angel. The important thing to know is that I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. The action and visuals are really well done, and I love how brutal the movie is. But still, the script is pretty weak, the characters are pretty weak, and the romance is corny as hell. Hustlers. It's an interesting story, and the acting is really good, especially and surprisingly Jennifer Lopez. But there are a lot of scenes that are either repetitive or out of place, and it ends on this very clean Hollywood note that doesn't feel genuine. Dr. Sleep, this is the sequel to The Shining, which is a masterpiece, but this movie, in my opinion, is very confused. It's very well shot and well acted, and the atmosphere is very engaging, but the movie itself is unable to decide whether to be more in the vein of Kubrick's Shining with subtle psychological horror, or be more like a typical Stephen King story where there's psychic superpowers and jump scares. And it gets so out of hand that the climax literally becomes a remake of The Shining. The Nightingale, I am very in the middle on this movie. I think that this movie looks gorgeous and the acting is very good, but the movie doesn't handle its disturbing subject matter right. There are scenes upon scenes of horrible brutality. It's not poorly done, but it gets to the point where it becomes too much and it loses its effectiveness. And on top of that, the characters and the story are very bland, and there are moments where the film becomes pretentious, especially with these really bad dream sequences. This really needed to be tweaked and rewritten, and it's a shame it wasn't because it really could have been something great. The King, this is where we start to get into good movies. The King is decent for the most part. It's an interesting story on political corruption, but there's nothing really special about it. Timothée Chalamet was kind of boring, especially with the fact that he almost never changed the tone of his voice, and there are some really dumb editing choices, especially during the final battle, but still, there are some really nice moments sprinkled throughout, and Robert Pattinson's French accent is just hilarious.
Giant balls with a tiny cock.
The Beach Bum, it's not a perfect movie. There are a lot of scenes where it just becomes too cynical and annoying for me, and I don't understand what the message of the movie is or if it even has a message. But it can't be denied that this movie is filled to the brim with hilarious characters and great scenes. Lego Movie 2, coming off of the first one, the message of Lego Movie 2 feels a lot more juvenile and cliche than the previous one. There were also a lot of cheesy scenes, and I didn't buy into the musical aspect either. The movie did it with a wink, but it still didn't work for me. That being said, the characters are very fun, especially Rex Dangerfest, and there are so many moments that are funny because of their subtlety or because they're just so absurd. Booksmart, I do not understand why everybody thinks this is great. It's a pretty conventional high school movie. Well done, but still pretty conventional. A lot of the side characters feel interchangeable with each other, and I really didn't like the use of music in this movie, especially when they changed it to a different song every 5 minutes. But the movie is really goddamn funny, and there's a lot of well-directed moments from Olivia Wilde, and I'm interested to see what she does next. Guava Island, the main problem with this movie is that it's too short, so it doesn't have the emotional gut punch it wants to have at the end, but the movie is really likable. The song numbers are well done, the story is pretty interesting, and I love how this movie is shot on 16mm. That made it especially interesting for me. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, I talked about this before. Overall, I like the movie. Us, the movie's script ain't great, it disobeys a lot of its own logic. The grunting noises that the doubles make are just hilarious, and that ending twist was pretty obvious. But still, this is a solidly made film. Jordan Peele really knows how to make a visually pleasing movie. The acting from everybody, especially Lupita Nyong'o, is very good, and despite all its problems, the ideas that this movie is exploring are very chilling to think about. Spider-Man: Far From Home, it's a solid superhero movie. Tom Holland as Spider-Man is great as always. There are a lot of funny moments. The plot is nicely self-aware. Mysterio is a very interesting and well-done villain, and the ending is very unique and makes me excited for the next one. That being said, for every funny moment, there's another comedic moment that just doesn't work, and the giant CGI battles just get to a point where it's too much. Fire, I talked about this before. Overall, it's a very good documentary. Apollo 11, this is a really interesting documentary that's made entirely out of unreleased, high-quality footage of the Apollo 11 mission. There are no interviews or voiceovers explaining everything, it's just this vivid experience. There's a point in the middle where it kind of drags, but the movie is very unique and it's not like a lot of other documentaries out there. Then again, I haven't seen nearly as many documentaries as narrative movies, so... Arctic, it's a really good survival movie with a great lead performance. Not a lot to say other than that. Shazam, the first genuinely good DCEU movie. The tongue-in-cheek humor and the performances are absolutely fantastic. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. The main character was a bit too unsympathetic to get fully invested, but this movie has a lot of clever filmmaking in it, and my god, Tom Hanks just disappears into the role of Fred Rogers. Dolomite Is My Name. It's a really fun biopic on Rudy Ray Moore. Eddie Murphy and Wesley Snipes are both hilarious. John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. The script ain't great, it changes locations a bit too much, and Halle Berry just kind of shows up and then leaves. But you're not there for the writing, you're there for some badass action, and this movie more than delivers in that department. Honey Boy, it was a very well done and personal story about a complicated father-son relationship. Shia LaBeouf was great, as was the kid actor. It just ended on a note that it felt kind of abrupt. Rocket Man. It was a genuinely well done and aesthetically pleasing version of Bohemian Rhapsody. Taron Egerton is fantastic, as are the song numbers, but there are a few moments that are very cheesy, especially that end montage that looks like a Google Slides presentation. Toy Story 4, a lot of people I know don't like it, but you can't deny that this is very well animated and very funny. The new characters are all fantastic, except for one who I completely forgot until I saw it a second time. What's her name? Like, Gigas? I also really liked Woody's character arc, and it provided a lot of the heart that the movie needed to justify its existence. However, I didn't really like the ending, not because of what it is on paper, because it's really good on paper, but in terms of execution, it felt overly cheesy and very rushed, and because of that, it failed to make me emotional. Still, it's an overall good movie, very heartwarming, very well made. So, El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie. Sure, it's unnecessary, but it's very well done. Aaron Paul is once again amazing as Jesse Pinkman, and it's an overall satisfying end to the Breaking Bad story. The two popes, there were some lighting issues. There's a scene where one of the popes enters a dark room that just gets brighter and brighter to the point where it feels blown out, but the script is pretty great. Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce are both fantastic, and they have a lot of great scenes together, and it really made the movie. Anyway, that's it. Stay tuned for the top 20. It should be coming out in a few days. Hopefully.